I'd like to introduce our Chief Innovation Officer, Josh Mesout, who's going to be moderating, and then all of our panelists. Thank you.
So many microphones, so little time. Thank you very much, guys. It's great to be back on stage. I am incredibly excited today to have some of the smartest and best Civo customers and partners from the network to help challenge some of the questions in the industry right now. One by one, I'll bring them on stage. Abdul, would you like to come on stage? Fantastic. Great one. Fantastic. Abdul comes from Covector, a very innovative agentic startup within the UK. Abdul, do you want to do a very short introduction for yourself?
Certainly. Good morning, everyone. I'm Abdul Hummaida. I'm founder and CTO of Covector. In financial services, there are a whole host of activities of internal business processes where people will kind of analyze data, whether it be structured or unstructured, rekey that information someone else, potentially build a template, share it with a team member. They may do some research about using some internal data or some web data. Those as activities are very well suited to AI automation, which is exactly what Covector does. So Covector builds AI agents for financial services.
Fantastic. Really exciting. And then to add to that lineup, we've got James from Claro, who's building some of the most innovative agentic solutions in the UK. James, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Josh. Good morning, everyone. Good to be here today. It's founder and CEO of Claro AI. We're building Claro for three main reasons. The first one is around data privacy. We believe that every business should get access to the best AI and build it in private and secure environments. We believe in sustainability, let's run these models, we scale these systems, but let's also do it responsibly for the environment, because I know one of the questions today will be around that, and the more this scales, the more expensive it gets. And the third reason is to remove the mundane from people's lives. I think there's a lot of work throughout businesses which is very repetitive, very boring, and kind of takes you away from creative tasks. So the agents and the workflows we deploy are very customized and built for certain workflows in businesses to really free up human potential and get you to spend time doing things you actually want to do instead of the boring stuff. So yeah, we engage with a whole host of businesses, usually in legal and finance. Those are our two big niches due to the data privacy and the limitations those companies face with the current solutions out there, like the OpenAIs of the world. So yeah, that's where our product fits, but we do also can go into any other vertical. Cool, thanks.
Fantastic. And Jonas from Nokia, with a wealth of experience about building high-performance systems and networks. Jonas, would you like to?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So my name is Jonas Vermeulen, and I'm leading the sales engineering team for Nokia across Europe. And we advise indeed customers on how to build out data center networks for their data centers, AI clusters. And we also advise how network operators can use AI to optimize their network operations, how they can make the most out of them and kind of optimize and see how AI can help them in their day-to-day life.
Fantastic. And last but certainly not least, Dan from Orbital Materials.
Thanks, Josh. Slow clap there. I'm Dan. I spoke earlier, but co-founder and CEO of Orbital Materials. We're kind of engineering the future of AI by designing the hardware infrastructure needed for the AI revolution.
Fantastic. And I think with a wealth of expertise and definitely a breadth of experience in different industries and verticals, an opening topic that I think we'd all like to discuss is what has become table stakes for an enterprise with AI in 2024, and what were we expecting to be in place this year that never quite materialized? Abdul, do you want to take a first stab at that?
Yeah, no, happy to. So some of the use cases for AI, certainly in kind of my area, which is software development and development of IP, the expectation was table stakes is kind of co-pilot tooling for debugging, for kind of boilerplate code generation. They've done really well. There's a variety of tools that exist in the market, Anthropic and many others. Those have done really well. And you could see as the models get better, the capability of the tooling and the output that they give software engineering teams has gone up. Some of the things that are perhaps have not done as well are mainly because they're still early in the adoption cycle, is kind of fully autonomous agents that will perhaps produce a production-ready code. So we're earlier in the cycle with those, but the general investment and the advancement that are happening on the agentic side are actually going to push those use cases. So I definitely think those will continue to get better. But yeah, the table stakes today and the ones, one particular example, there are others, and I think the rest of the team can cover them. But for software engineering, the use of the tooling to enhance productivity for software engineering teams has been great.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Abdul, and that was one of the things I wanted to mention, is when it's a very small defined task, whether it's coding or reviewing a proposal or writing even a section of a document, something that's easy to evaluate and can provide like a quick win. I think that's something that's been incredibly powerful for all enterprises. They're still lacking on the automation side of that. It still requires humans to go and write the prompt, which I think can be quite a tedious task for a lot of people to get right. But when you start automating these simple tasks to produce one big automation, that's where I think enterprises have seen a lot of enhancements this year. And I also to agree with Abdul on the autonomous coding pieces. We actually have rules in our senior dev team where you cannot vibe code in any of our repos. Our marketing team's allowed to vibe code their own apps on Lovable, Chef. I think those are great ways to practice autonomous coding. It kind of gives people without technical experiences or departments like marketing that they have no engineers in the departments, the ability to POC stuff and show value to the engineers that could then maybe be like, all right, we're going to take this and build it into an actual app. But in terms of letting code or letting autonomous AI go loose in repos, I think that's something that we're still quite far away off.
I would say on our side, we see a lot of uptake on AI on the troubleshooting and the operational side of things. So as we are building out networks for our customers, they often want to know how to use them, and whether that's about learning a CLI or whether that's figuring out what's going wrong with the network. We provide these tools so they can interact, as an example, in human language with the switches or with the infrastructure. So they can ask, like, what is the health of my network? Is there a performance degradation going on? How should I troubleshoot that? And every time, through using large language models, it actually gives you a set of steps that you can use as a network engineer to kind of go through that and figuring out what is actually going on, right? So that's one aspect. The other one is a lot around the data collection and doing anomaly detection and proactively seeing if there is performance degradation, if there is something, whether it's a security attack that is going on. So a lot of the AI tools are in that space as well that we can that we develop and actually offer to our customers as well.
Brilliant. It's a lot of stuff I don't want to repeat. I think what we've seen the biggest acceleration is AI for software developers and the massive acceleration and improvement in writing code through those tools. I think where we're seeing not necessarily the realized ambition is the human-machine interface, particularly for non-software developers, and how particularly think AI for science. We see a lot of progress from the algorithmic side, but not translation and transfer into the real world. And I think that's really what next year hopefully is going to be for us, but also other companies in the space, from AI drug discovery to AI for materials. It's really moving from the computer into the real world is going to be where the acceleration, what really matters.
I think fascinating. Just to summarize there, we're seeing huge value behind software engineering being accelerated with agents. I think we're all still having the human very firmly in the loop by the sound of it, and actually being able to replicate those we think has some real value, but we're in the early stages of it. I think moving on there actually is to some news that happened the past few weeks, is with $150 billion worth of money come across to invest in the UK AI infrastructure. I guess with you all having ran businesses before that money coming in, how would you advise that investment to best serve the UK? Who would like to go first?
I can go first on this one. So I have two answers for that. The first one, I think talent's a big thing. Traditionally, AI has been a very broad field, structured data, machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision, quite dispersed. But over the last 5 years, due to the demand for natural language processing techniques for large language models, that's where all the demand is for data scientists. And reality is anyone that's trying to get into agentic AI now is either from a very small pool of experienced NLP people or have only been working on this for 2 or 3 years, and they don't have this big production experience of how do you actually make these systems go from a POC to highly scalable on enterprise databases. It's a very challenging kind of grouping of skill sets. So I think there needs to be a lot more funding put into enhancing people's skills of natural language processing, working with those sort of databases, or those data sets rather. And the other one is a little bit of a niche answer. I'd say we see a lot of challenges in legacy systems and enterprises, and how do you link those up to agentic systems? We had one business which was still running on a very old Microsoft database that was built in like the 90s, and they were asking us to do an MCP server over that. For anyone that knows what an MCP server is, it's how you wrap kind of a model interface layer over some APIs. It's very new. It's been around for 6 or 7 months now, or at least popular for that long. And you look at these enterprise systems, you're like, how the hell are we going to fix this or do this? So I think a lot of businesses need to get access to funding to help them migrate their systems to be something that's way more accessible and available to agentic AI. At the end of the day, everyone in agentic AI is solving something called the context problem. Out of a massive ocean of information in an enterprise, how do you find the exact right piece of information to do that task? And the bigger and more complex the systems are, the harder it is to find that. So getting businesses to transition to make it a bit easier would be a good use of money.
I'm happy to go next.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I think there are two kind of sides to this. So to a tech vendor like Covecta and many of the others on the panel here today, there are two things. As an AI technology developer, you need access to infrastructure, the ability to, whether it be to fine-tune and to continue to develop, and you need talent to echo James's point. So on talent particularly, I think we're experiencing probably one of the most challenging periods in the technology sector in the UK. And AI has in a way compounded by shifting the need for the skill sets. To think of, when I think about the AI role, probably 18 months to 2 years ago was probably the 5th most sought out skill in the industry. Today it's the 1st. And if I look further, there's data when you look at things like UCAS, I see the problem getting even more complicated, because when I look at undergraduate intake for UK universities in 25, the number of AI or universities that are offering specific AI courses is on the up, but the intake of computer science students broadly across the UK is 10% down. So what that says to me is that not only is this problem here today, it's actually going to get worse. So as an industry, we have to do things towards that. Broadly, I think there was a survey recently that looked at 50% of tech leaders, or 52% to be more precise, were finding challenges in recruiting the AI skill set, and they've got open roles. And James, when we were speaking earlier, we personally echo that as a challenge.
It has been the hardest part about building a team or building a business, is to find not just the right skills, but to find them when you need them. It's day-to-day capacity is always a challenge, and that comes with skills.
Yeah, I think on the infrastructure side, I think it's important because that funding will allow you actually for the UK to determine its own destiny by building out the infrastructure to keep all the data local, to have the sovereignty here in country. And doing this in a country like UK isn't easy because of kind of the power grid structure and where you have access to land and power and so on. Now, that means that you could get into more smaller multiple deployments that all have to be designed, have to be architected, have to be interconnected. And that takes time, that takes investments, right? So that's I think, one real good part of having that funding available. Plus you have to offset anyway the energy kind of bill penalty compared to what the energy costs in the Nordics as an example, right? So that's one part. The other part on talent, fully agree, because in the end, it's through talent and through the use of AI that we can realize that productivity leap forward, right? And that can set us apart further in future. So that is a key investment area there, because if we forget about developing that talent, we actually won't reap the benefits of all the AI here.
To add on to that, kind of 3 points. I think one is investment in sovereign AI and sovereign data center, sovereign cloud, which Civo is playing a big active role here in the UK on. And how do we build the next UK hyperscaler, or the UK hyperscaler, is something that I think from a sovereign perspective is going to become increasingly important. And how do we use that investment and use government funding available through things like the AI Action Plan to incentivize that and to make that a reality rather than importing US-based hyperscalers into the UK. Second, I think it's a huge opportunity to provide growth capital to UK-based startups so that you don't have to face the choice of relocating to the US to be able to access that late-stage capital to scale your business. It's going to become increasingly important to keep the AI talent and the AI businesses here in the UK, most importantly. And then the third point, I think there's a huge opportunity to invest in skill set, but also encourage companies to open up here. You have a richness, or we have a richness in AI talent and a great university system. And actually encourage companies, as you see with OpenAI, with Cohere, opening offices here, to encourage them to come and invest in the UK and create high-paying jobs in this space for UK graduates is something that I think we should be continuing to encourage and incentivize.
I just want to add something there, because we've obviously discussed talent here a bit, and I think in the market, people are often worried like AI is taking jobs, but I've actually seen 3 new jobs in the last 2 years in a business which didn't exist before that we now see people need. The first one, and it's quite a common one that anyone could guess, is prompt engineers, is people that can actually instruct these models to do really awesome things, and that's been around for obviously the last 2 years. The next one, something I'm calling context architects, and this is a non-technical role, someone that can understand all the business assets within a business, how they are used, which people use them, when they're needed, how you can get value from that, and then take that back to your context engineers and be like, right, this is the scope of work needed for this workflow to automate this process. That's the second one, is context architects. The third one is something called evaluators. A lot of garbage comes out of agents and large language models, and if it's saving you 10 hours, you might need still an hour or 1 extra hour of someone to go over and evaluate this and say, does this actually make sense? Is this a task that can be executable? And that's just someone that has a really good attention to detail, has very good context of the business in themselves, and can quite easily detect what's right or wrong. So those are like 3 roles that I'm seeing emerging, which are non-technical roles that I would encourage people to learn in school and university so that they can be very employable by lots of businesses in the future. Is that my answer wrong?
I have to say, this felt awfully like Deal or No Deal there, didn't it? I think moving on just to dig deeper into that subject and actually start to explore what makes building in AI in the UK so great is I spoke this morning on stage about the fact that the UK can stand to pick up 753 billion by 2038. And part of that is because we've already got such a rock-solid investment in the AI industry in the UK, and it's almost ripe for us to be able to leverage. I'd like to ask 2 questions. One, where would you really like to see that growth going towards? What do you think that looks like? And then the other thing is, why do you build AI in the UK?
Happy to go. Go for it.
Thank you. So we're based in the UK, and I think the UK has an amazing talent. Alan Turing, he was a British scientist, and he and many others developed and laid some of the foundations for what we kind of consider as AI today. So, and I think we have an amazing set of talent and a set of entrepreneurs in London and the UK as a whole. So I think we have the nucleus to develop and innovate in AI. And while the UK has not seen a foundational model, you touched on that note earlier, there have been, I think, some challenges from an infrastructure perspective that's contributed to that. Historically, the UK has done really well from a hardware perspective. If you look at the M4 corridor, there are a whole host of innovative UK companies, Arm and many others, who have kind of really led the wave in terms of innovation and kind of led the UK technology. When it comes to foundational models, we've just not had the infrastructure, I believe, enough to enable the skill and the talent that we do have to develop capabilities like a full foundational model. Some of the investment that's coming in as part of the waves that we've just discussed, I think will continue to help that. Availability of data centers in areas, in some cases outside of London, I think will continue to help that. There are other regions outside of London where innovation is increasingly happening, so that's really positive to see. So I would love to see for a foundational model developed here in the UK. That would be fantastic.
Sorry, just to reiterate the question, you're asking about the risks of AI in 2027? Or?
Yeah, but 2038.
To 2038, okay. So I think there's, I think a lot of businesses do face risk of emerging new businesses that are AI native. I think if you look at in legal, for example, everyone, if you're a big business, like whatever, and you need to go out to a law firm and spend a bunch of money with them, that's a field which I see that could be quite at risk in the future, because what if an AI business comes along and they could say, we have a solution for you which is a fraction of the price, it's going to deliver the exact same outcomes in a fraction of the time. And that business is much smaller than a law firm, for example, but they can provide the solution at a much more efficient cost entry point. So I think a lot of businesses face that risk in general of AI native businesses that are going to spin up and do a lot. And if I was running a business that was a little bit, built a few years ago, I'd be thinking, what AI could I now implement to almost shift my model and reinvent my business using this technology?
And I think that's what's going to happen. I mean, in some way, that's what's going to happen. Certain parts of the business, a lot of the operational tasks might be digitized, might be replaced is a strong word, but might benefit a lot from the AI models that can optimize that. On the other hand, it gives us productivity. It gives us the tools, the time to actually take it a step forward and increase what we can do as a business with the amount of developers, documentation writers, doing any kind of financial study. A lot of the deep research will actually help in there, and that's where I think is the opportunity as well for UK to actually take that step forward and be a leader in Europe or across the world even.
I think from an infrastructure perspective, as the UK needs to invest a lot more in building out its power infrastructure. Energy is a huge challenge. The cost of energy in this country makes it fairly economically unviable to build large data centers, permitting issues. And I think the opportunity in front of us is kind of a reindustrialization of the UK and building out of this large-scale infrastructure and job opportunities through that. And how can we be incentivizing that and creating an ecosystem that actually enables these new companies to form is going to be fundamental. And the risk is that the UK gets left behind.
And indeed, you mentioned 2038, so there is indeed opportunity to build out, whether it's new power plants or to relay a part of the grid, because that's indeed to take enough megawatts, gigawatts actually down to the data center. It's not just tapping into the distribution network. It's really about the high-end part of the network that you really need to rethink. So it's a good point to bring up the power grid.
Did you have something to add to that, James?
I was actually going to turn the question back to you and say what do you think about what some of the risks could be going into the future? I know you've always got some good opinions on this.
I think it's really about making sure that we can get vertically integrated AI in the UK. And that's not just about making sure that we own the entire supply chain, but that we've got the underlying expertise in the supply chain to be able to do so. If I think about some of the things that make the current generation of AI engineers we have in the UK so amazing, it's because they've worked under the BT engineers who set up the OpenReach network and the early wave of IBM consulting models that came together. And we have a pedigree, a real pedigree, and are really internationally known at doing this stuff well. So I think it's about making sure we keep that expertise and skill set and service orientation in the UK. That's the reason why people choose to run services here. That's why people always fame after UK AI engineers. But I think there's a really good point to go through there around underlying infrastructure. I think also Abdul and Dan spoke about, if we don't have the power here to be able to run these data centers, that will always be a blocker. I'll move on to the next question, actually, which is about exactly power use and how that derives into AI challenges for industry. So this year, I think we've come to the agreement the reasoning models have been placed top on the leaderboard. Reasoning models effectively use additional compute and additional time to be able to provide an even stronger, more accurate answer. I guess with that being the paradigm that we're looking at, and everyone on the stage here today saying that power and data centers is going to be a challenge, I guess what can we do to make sure as we go forward we're building sustainable AI solutions that are aware of these challenges and solving in the right way? Who would like to go first?
I'm happy to take this one first. So Mark in his opening talk earlier, which was really brilliant, talked about the Industrial Revolution, how this is like the biggest thing that's happened since then, in a way. And I think we'd call this as the intelligence revolution, potentially. And I think every industrial revolution has come with massive backlash of emissions, whether you were building supply chains or factories. Those all, as that scaled out, as a technology or as a wave, we as the Earth, we've felt the repercussions of that. And to what Josh is saying, a very similar thing is going to happen with AI. There is a big power shortage. There's a lot of demand, growing demand. Models are getting more hungry for energy. So we are under a big threat of having another massive global climate crisis, I guess. Now, I think there's two ways in which we can limit this or bring this to a manageable level. I think the first one is when it comes down to the data center and your infrastructure. That's stuff like what Dan's doing, what Civo do with how they get emissions back into the grid. Also running on renewable sources. I think that's a way to use energy which we're creating through renewable ways to power this intelligence revolution. So it is large on the infrastructure, and I'll leave that to the experts to probably talk more about. What I would say on my perspective, it's going to come down to the models, making them more efficient, just like supply chains. We made those more and more efficient to get less emissions. We're already seeing now some of the Gemma models, which are small models, a comparison to Gemini, which is the big model that Google have. Those models now are as good as Gemini was a year ago, and they're much smaller and much more efficient. So I am optimistic that models are going to go smaller. They're still going to be incredibly good and get better and better, but they are going to become more efficient and more scalable. And we saw that with computer vision. That was a big, computer vision models now are very tiny. They're super accurate. But back in 2012, they were big, and they did take a lot of processing power. So I think general trend of the model to get smaller will be a big thing for the data scientists to work on.
Yeah, I think it's good what you say. It's important that the training of foundational models or any kind of training becomes more efficient. I mean, what I see on the infrastructure side, I mean, indeed, like GPUs are also becoming more powerful, and as a result, you will need less of them to kind of process the same amount of data. Yet, if you look at the overall kind of deployment rate, and it's kind of, you don't see that yet. I mean, the amount of gigawatts that are announced or the amount of billions that are actually being invested is still very exponential at the moment. And at the very moment, I don't see like a good way to do this in a sustainable way yet. I mean, you have countries where you can do that, like Iceland, where you got access to thermal power, where you get, like in Nordics, where you have access maybe to water power. Here in UK, and in the US actually the same. It's a bit of a combination play at the moment, where you have access to limited supply from the power grid, and all the rest you have to generate locally right next to the DC with gas turbines to even add up to enough power to supply that DC. So, and I think that's where the biggest effort, or I mean, there's an area of investigation we should really look into. How can we actually do this in a more sustainable way, even in the UK? Whether that's like, I mean, doing things in a more distributed fashion, where you just access, like, only to a limited amount of power locally, right? And then you federate some of that, whether it's training or inference capacity. Because that's, to me, the most kind of scalable way to do this. I mean, to build up enough capacity, whether that's to help with foundational trainings or to build out enough inference capacity.
I think organizations where there is kind of skill set that can assess some of the internal workloads, or even if they're a tech vendor in terms of kind of managing their platform, there's a choice of selecting an appropriate, potentially more efficient, either from both a cost and an energy perspective, model that can fulfill that workload. Where organizations where that's not the case, and the decision is just to, oh, it's an AI inference workload, so therefore send it to our approved large language model. That's kind of more inefficient use of the technology. So obviously, the more tech expertise you have, the more opportunities you can make some of those more optimal decisions. That's kind of at the organizational level. I think when you look at the data centers themselves, more recent and new data center development typically has kind of green initiatives that go with it and incentives to kind of be more sustainable. But I think there's an opportunity for research around the orchestration layer in terms of the model itself and how it runs. So, and what I mean by that is opportunities for figuring out intent of what the model wants to do and potentially configuring the model to run in a more efficient kind of mode. Similar in how many of our cars today, typically, you know, a car would, unless it's kind of switched to a certain mode, then it kind of, certainly you know, an engine, mechanical engine car will switch to a more less efficient, you know, usage of fuel. So similar research that allows GPUs and the general AI infrastructure to behave in that way will bring advantages, both from a power perspective and therefore from a sustainability perspective.
I think from a sustainability perspective, in this country, we need to have a conversation about nuclear. In the UK is a leader in small-scale modular reactors, which you're seeing for behind-the-grid power. Do we want to continue to incentivize and invest in that so UK can become a world leader in exporting that technology? What do we do about the build-out of nuclear power in this country? You see the huge advantages that France has had in their consistency with staying with nuclear in terms of the build-out of their AI infrastructure. So I think there's some going to really tough conversations to have about what does sustainability mean. You see a lot of data centers using renewables or power purchase agreements that offset with renewables, but that is actually a finite amount from a scalability perspective. And so I think we need to have a serious conversation about what does sustainability mean for our power grid and how rapidly we can scale that up to meet the workloads that we want to have running in this country. If you look at the AI action plan, it's what, 7 500-megawatt data centers. That power is not just sitting idly somewhere in the UK. Similarly, when it comes to investment in solar and wind farms, this is a huge CapEx investment that needs to be potentially incentivized to be able to reduce the cost such that UK is competitive. And how do we do that and what are the trade-offs there? I think potentially from a model efficiency perspective, that could work from an AI edge inference workload. But we're also saying we want to see the first foundation models developed in this country. That's a very different sort of value prop. And actually that's going to require a huge amount of energy. And running the latest GPUs in a centralized data center that is, you know, the first gigafactories in this country. And that's a different proposition that requires a different understanding of what is the energy requirements that we need to be investing in as a country.
I think some really good answers there, definitely around making sure we've got the right infrastructure underneath us to scale, making sure that we're doing this the right way, and I think also just keeping efficiency in mind. Much has been the same with computing and in general. I guess at this point here, we normally turn over to the audience for a few questions. Does anyone have any questions for the panel to start? And make sure we've got some more coming just behind as we go. This gentleman in the white checkered shirt was first. Can we get a microphone over to this man?
Yeah, thank you. Oh, just knocked my water over, sorry. Really interesting what you're saying about the power grid and the need for kind of the UK to be sovereign in terms of its own capability to develop AI. I wonder how much as well you see that as also a national security issue as well, because of course we live in a world now where the geopolitics moves very quickly. So I'm wondering how important you think it is, not just from a perspective of, you know, UK being leading, but also UK protecting itself.
I think it's fundamental. It is a national security issue. It's a health security issue. You had a great presentation earlier by the Oxford professor around using AI screening for cancers. If running those inference workloads abroad and somehow that gets disconnected from a bad actor or someone else, that becomes hugely problematic in terms of the ability for the NHS to deliver. And so I think it's intimately tied to it. But I think narratively that becomes quite difficult for government to be thinking about expending money in defense, where actually I think they're intimately intertwined.
Overall, I mean, we're talking here UK, but if you look at the European Union, there is indeed like a lot of investments that are being written out, like the European Commission is having tenders out at the very moment to subsidize like 5, what they call giga AI factories, exactly with the intent of developing things in a more sovereign, more protected, safer way there.
Actually, a similar point you have in Germany. They're launching a 500 billion infrastructure and defense fund around building German native companies in those sectors. And, what are we doing as the UK to ensure that we have UK-based companies at the forefront of these industries? Sorry.
No, not at all. I think there are two parts to the question in terms of the security. I think obviously you're probably referencing the output of the model itself, and in terms of what's the relevant of that in terms of whether there's any kind of implication about who developed or who trained the model. So I think that's an important aspect that's been covered. What I would like to cover is also the other side of the security elements of that, which is the data that has been fed to the model and what, in terms of any potential retraining that the provider of the model could be using with that data. Many of us operate in regulated environments, and certainly we at Covecta do, and that naturally means that you are required to, even if you are importing and bringing the technology like LLM into your technology stack, that now all of a sudden you've got an additional layer of requirement of ensuring the security and the sovereignty of your data, or more specifically, your customers' data. So the fact that how containerized that is, how that it's not shared with the model provider, it brings additional challenges in terms of operating with the technology. And it's a particular area that kind of places more of a requirement on us as vendors and operators of technology, of the responsibility that's kind of required. So I think that there are two elements to it. There's the element of, as you say, the output of the model, and also how to operate the model itself. Because once you've even secured the kind of output that the model has, how you interact with the model still remains an important challenge.
Not too much to add to them, but yeah, I'd just say that the enterprises and businesses are going to struggle to solve a lot of use cases without good security and privacy. They can do fun ones like generating LinkedIn posts or summarizing a proposal, but like the really high value ones that need access to very important data is going to be a challenge until people do have access to more private environments. Where can I run this? That it doesn't have to sit on my servers, but I just want to know that it's on one server and it's in the right place in the UK and it's not going out of it. And having that peace of mind, I think, then allows people to open themselves up a bit and say, okay, what are these other use cases we can solve on our confidential, important data? So yeah, other than that, you guys all answered it well.
Yeah, I think fascinating subject there, especially around everyone seems to have strong advocacy for us owning our power supply chain, our data supply chain, and making sure we can see exactly where that supply chain is. Fantastic. There was another question just on the same. There you go.
Thank you, guys, every one of you. My question was mainly about, so let's say if we talk about now public AI, if we come to that, okay, because up till now we've been talking about more or less, let's say, private AI within the enterprises and that sort of thing, okay. But what about public AI? So obviously right now I think we're in the current position of developing it, at least in the private sector. But eventually I think it will be rolled out into public domains, right? Mm. So in those terms, could you tell me what sort of like safeguards or even, let's say, security issues, as I think the previous gentleman was talking about, national security and such, right? Okay, but if we talk about in terms of general usage or accessibility by the public, could you enlighten us a little bit more on that, or what enterprises are doing about that right now?
Of course. So I guess just to summarize that the right way for the audience is what safeguards are currently being put in place for the AI that the public are interacting with, and how do we make sure that they're the right and appropriate safeguards to keep us on track? I think that's a really good one. Who would want to grab that first?
So I can take that. So I'd say when you're using a public AI, again, I'm just going to try to reiterate the question. Public AI, what are safeguards are being used by these public model providers to ensure that we can put our data in there, and what can we do to limit what we put in there?
Exactly, yeah. Yep.
So I think you have to be quite intentional with how you use something like Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT. Like if you've got a very confidential data piece, you should really think twice about putting it in there. I'd say that's that's a human error. I've heard of people that have put very important client passwords into a ChatGPT once and then being like, oh wait, how do I get that out now? And then it's gone. You can't purge it. It's stuck on the servers. I think they do have some sort of data retention policy, but it's I think under the US Cloud Act, that data is still accessible by the government, so it's not fully private. So you always got to think about what you're putting in it. But at the end of the day, these are really big businesses that have great security protocols around their models and their technology. So I think there is a level of trust you can have on a lot of use cases.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the usage of, if you like, the standalone LLMs like ChatGPT and many others, they typically, they've started out as a consumer product, right? And with development, they've essentially entered the enterprise, then the kind of an enterprise version of those got developed. So an enterprise version would kind of have more security, segregation of data, promise that data is not shared for training models, etc. Many of the vendors have that as a capability, and if obviously if you're interacting with one, you need to kind of ensure that those mechanisms are appropriate for you. So that's kind of the safety from a security perspective. Is that what you meant by the question, or did you mean maybe even safety in a just a general wider sense of what the model can produce?
Or more like hallucination? Is that what you were more referring to as a?
I would probably say more in the sense that, for example, as you know that, I'm not talking about everyone, but you know how certain actors can use anything, any sort of technology, right? Either for any sort of good or even for nefarious purposes. I think we've even seen that right now, especially with currency, cybersecurity hacks right now currently. So just about 2-3 days ago, I think there was a small children's nursery, I think, was hacked, right? I can definitely tell you that most probably the actual attackers actually used somewhat a AI sort of platform, okay, to actually perform that attack. Because it does not take you that quick, all of a sudden. No, obviously, of course not. But it doesn't take you that quick to actually launch an attack.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, I think to summarize this and close this one off, is there's some really good exercises we need to instruct people who are using these technologies to use every day. So I think a really good exercise I tell people to do is go to ChatGPT, say, look at my previous conversations and complete this form for me. And what you put in that form is all the information you want to know if ChatGPT will give you. And a lot of people are shocked that actually you're able to refine an awful lot of information about someone from their conversations they put into an LLM. And I think that would be the piece around I'd advise too. Let's take another question and move forward, because we have so many coming through. Whoever's closest to you, James.
So this year, the MI State of AI in Business 2025 report, it's a bit of a more business-orientated question. 95% of enterprise Gen AI initiatives apparently fail due to brittle workflows. So I was just curious as to what people's thoughts are, maybe in integrating AI sometimes on an enterprise level or in business.
Yeah, you definitely got the people doing it right here. Who would like to go first?
Yeah, I can take that. So I think what we've learned this year in AI is if you try do autonomy too early on too big and difficult of a use case, it's generally going to fail. Because back to my statement earlier on the context problem, if you've got this absolute ocean of information across a business and you're asking an agent to go off and find the answer, it's going to be extremely expensive. And B, you're probably going to get diminishing returns in accuracy every time it loops to a new reasoning tool. So that's where I think a lot of these use cases fail, and it's either due to accuracy or because it's become too expensive and finance has said, I'm turning that off because the ROI is poor. But on the other side to that, with the ones that we are seeing success in, and I think where the market's going at the moment is to be more defined in your workflows. Let's look at one single line of work. What are the data assets needed for each node in that decision? How can we clearly tell LLMs how to make decisions, not just telling them to figure out it, and have that very defined workflow. Way more accurate, way more cost effective. You can pick the right model for the right job as well. You can say this is a small summarization task, therefore let's use a small LLM, so a bit better on the cost and energy perspective. And you can evaluate it. You know what the outputs, if you can get a benchmark data set and say these are the right answers, the ground truths, as they call it in data science, you can you can easily evaluate it and know which nodes or which parts of those workflow need attention to increase accuracy. And that's, I think, how we're going to see a much bigger adoption in the short to medium term in AI. And as models get better, as we solve more of the context problem that I keep talking about, we will get to more autonomous systems. But that's probably still, it's maybe a next year thing.
I agree with James. I think looking at what some of Covector's customers are doing in terms of deploying our agents, defined workflows work really well, where they have an understanding of a specific internal business process, and that gets mapped to an agent or multiple agents as part of a workflow and gets deployed, seeing that increasingly do well, and customers seeing the realization of the productivity that comes from that. And also, I think what's happening in terms of the industry, a wider acceptance of agentic behavior is running in parallel with the availability of some of these workflows from vendors like Covector and others. And combined, I think that's really helping the adoption of kind of agentic behavior in workflows. So I really expect to see more of an increase in the adoption in the application of workflows.
Yeah, I think it depends on the expectations. 95% is a very high number. The question is how high were these, or what were the expectations of those people who started off with the process and evaluated how much ROI they could get out of it. So I think today what I see is that you can use a lot of the AI workflows to help you do almost like transactional things, give you advice, but you still need somehow a human oversight and clearly review the outcomes and see if maybe the workflow suggested is indeed the one that you really want to apply maybe in your production environment. And where I see today is like really a mode of people are starting to get comfortable with the steps suggested. And once they're like 95% confident on each time they write, only then I can see like, okay, now we're really moving into the real adoption of agentic AI and get it on like as a daily life or daily operational environment.
I don't think it's surprising, because the challenges you have with the adoption of a new technology is the reimagining of workflow. It's a digital transformation project, and you can't expect the rolling out of a SaaS solution to be able to transform how a company operates. It's a multi-year challenge, and when you think about the most successful companies in embedding new technologies into businesses, they started out with a very strong consulting-oriented go-to-market, and really embedding their process, their product into every bit of the workflow, the deep understanding of that. And that's enabled them to see the benefits of the rollout of that platform. And so I think there is this misalignment that you provide licenses to your staff and all of a sudden you expect it to have huge, massive improvements in productivity and ROI. I think it also creates a huge opportunity for companies who are starting as AI native, because you're developing your workflows, particularly around that technology, to exploit it much faster than the incumbents would be able to do. And so that actually becomes a huge competitive advantage, and that's something that we see and why we've become vertically integrated, is that we don't see a company like a BASF or a Johnson Matthey being able to be an AI native chemical R&D company. And so how do we see that actually as an opportunity to see the next set of generational companies that are going to be the big drivers of GDP in the UK over the next 50 to 100 years?
I think really, really good point there, Dan, completely. Should we take another question? James, if we could take one from this side of the room, just we've been over here.
Hi, my name's Simon Morrison from a company called Ricardo. We're an engineering and environmental consultancy. Just wanted to go back to the discussion around infrastructure. We're involved in a number of really kind of innovative ways of trying to accelerate grid connections for data centers or for renewable generators. And our engineers get really excited about that stuff. But it's innovative, and it feels like it's trying to get around a problem. It's not trying to solve the problem. We're coming up with clever solutions to get around the fact there's not enough wires in the ground. And some of the things that are challenging with that to speed up the kind of implementation is regulation and planning. And I just wonder what the panel's views are on changes that might be needed to regulations and kind of things that are governing the rollout of new infrastructure.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's what does UK reform on regulation around building infrastructure is going to be fundamental. You see overtures to that in the AI action plan around government's real role there in terms of galvanizing investment is reducing regulation and time to market. But I think the intention there is actually what happens when it comes to the implementation with the civil servants and how quickly can we get this changes in regulation to enable the build out. And I think historically the UK has been fairly conservative on that. And then the challenge is, are we able to move quick enough from a regulatory perspective? The other play, here's to kind of flip that, is you introduce regulation to incentivize change. So you see that at the EU level, for instance, where you have several EU member states introducing waste heat regulation, as well as introducing regulation on PUE, which is the measure of the data center energy efficiency, so that they force new builds to hit thresholds which force innovation and to enable innovators to get to market faster. And I think there's kind of two sides of the same coin. We probably need to be doing both in this country.
Anything to add to that point?
A small part. I think Dan knows this area probably more than I do, but I understand that the new AI zones in the UK are getting more flexibility in terms of speeding up the bureaucratic process of going through an application process, building a data center, etc. So, while I understand that that's happening in those new growth areas, there's still, I believe, there's the fundamental challenge of delivering the power that is then going to drive those data centers. So I think what I'm trying to say is that it's a multi-tiered problem. You can, from a policy perspective, you can improve regulation and the speed of the development, but you still fundamentally have to deliver the power that's going to drive the innovation that we need, to continue what we do.
I completely agree. I think there's a lot of regulation coming in now which is UK specific, based on UK problems. Particularly a lot of that is being able to enable data centres outside of London, in actually areas where we've got a lot of access to raw power and be able to do so. I think as we keep moving forward, one of the things I like most in the AI action plan is a promise and commitment to continuously listening to what businesses need. And that tells me that we're not done writing regulation. We've still got a very long way to go. We have 2 minutes, and I'm adamant we can fit a very quick question in. This one has a 2-minute question. There you go. Those two there have been waiting.
Okay, I'm closer over here, so I'm going to go ahead and give it over here.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about this. This is not really a 2-minute question. It's more philosophical and humanitarian. How far away do you think we are from AGI and the point after that, the singularity, where AI is actually taking over and leaving us behind? That's very interesting. That's kind of... yeah, I'll stop there. It's enough.
Okay. Should we do 10, 15 seconds each? Rapid round.
I can go for that first.
After you, James.
I do actually spend a lot of time thinking about that, as I have to. But I don't think our current model architectures are going to get us to that. I think LLM's they have limits. I think there's other models that are emerging in the market, such as world models. As you might see some of the Meta, JEPA networks, which are really interesting because they have a more conceptual understanding of the world, not just what we see in text. Anyone that kind of follows Jan LeCun, he's the head of Facebook AI research, or Meta AI research there. He's one of the founding fathers of deep learning, and he echoes this a lot. And I think you have to kind of also ask yourself, like, what is intelligence? I think the models we have now are great reasoning engines. And I think there's a difference between reasoning and intelligence. I think us as people, what we have, which is really awesome, is the ability to connect the dots. We can know who we know what we know where to find information, and we can use our minds and our brains to reason and come up with solutions and very, very intelligent kind of perspectives and actions. And I see right now LLMs are great at reasoning, but until we've solved the context problem, all the little agents that need to go find the right information to do the reasoning, we're still quite far away off. So I wouldn't say I'd say it's like not with these current models, and not in the next 5 to 10 years.
Happy to take a quick one at that. So I think personally I'm an optimist. I think there are many positive actors in the field than there are vicious ones. And my question about AGI is typically, as a researcher and a developer of technology in the field, is why do we need AGI in the first place? Why is it a question? So it's really interesting. I feel like people like myself find themselves needing to provide an answer for that. And I can definitely do from a technical perspective, but I think from how you stated the question, from a philosophical perspective, my answer back is, why do we need it in the first place? What is its purpose?
That's a good point.
That's actually a fantastic point for us to wrap up the panel on. Can I get a round of applause for these fantastic guests?